All right. So we'll jump back in here. All right. So the next topic that we want to discuss here is CSS flexbox. So what is flexbox? All right. It allows us to align things vertically and horizontally. It's a display value like a display block. We can place it in a container to present and create a flex container. And all the elements inside of a div with the display flex are flex items. So we have the display property, and we have our flex container and our flex items. All right. The main axis is defined by the FlexDirection property. Right? The cross axis runs perpendicular to the main axis. Let's go ahead and jump into an example here. Take a look at the CSS flexbox. Okay, there we go.
Oh, I can't see it.
Oh, okay. All right, here we go. So here's our CSS flexbox layout module. So before the flexbox layout module, there were 4 layout modes. We have block for sections in a web page, inline for text, a table for 2-dimensional table data, position for explicit position of an element. And using the flexbox layout module, it makes it easier to design flexible, responsive layout structure without using float or positioning. So let's go ahead and try this example here. In this case, we have a div and we have a class flex container. So here we can try to resize the browser. Look at that spacing. So how would you describe this sort of interaction with the style of the flexbox?
Responsive?
Okay, responsive. Can anyone come up with an analogy?
I don't necessarily know about an analogy, but it reminds me of when you're on your when you're minimizing your screen, that your navigations they reduce in size.
Yep. So here we have FlexWrap. We can change this to, we have Flex No Wrap here. We can change it to FlexWrap. So here we're getting a wrapping effect, right? We can change this to no wrap, keeping everything all in one. This goes back to one of those questions that Edwin asked a while ago, right? How can I wrap the text in that container? What if you have a bunch of blocks, you want to wrap them around in some content, right? Then we can use the wrap value. Here we go. So try to resize the browser window, and a container with FlexWrap no wrap will never wrap its items. All right, so we do no wrap, it will never wrap its items. What type of selector is this? Can someone tell me? Direct child selector. Yeah. So here we're going on the Flex container, and then we're going down to the div element, and we're styling it, right? And we're setting this to a width of 100 pixels, a margin of 10 pixels, and we're setting it to the center and a line height of 75 pixels and a font size of 35 pixels. All right. So let's take a look at this. We also have the CSS display property. So the display property displays behavior type of a rendering box of an element. So you can go ahead and try this here. So if we want to display content inline, we just set the display to inline. A block is a block, right? We can change any of these elements that feature these classes to either be block, inline block, or none. So look at the difference here, right? We have a display of none. So a display of none is set on example 1. So we have an example 1, and there should be a hello world. Where is it? It's not there because it's a display of none. So if we modify this and we change this to a display inline, there it is. We can use this property value to hide text in our fields. So imagine combining this with some of the stuff that we just looked at, right? We have the conditional CSS media queries rules, and we can conditionally set text to be none. We also have inline block and inline block. Okay, so block creates that new line. Inline block, well, inline block creates a new line but wraps the rest of the text around it. And then when we have inline, remember the inline elements. Can someone give me an example of an inline element in HTML?
Span.
Yep. Right. So yeah, this is a way for us to style our elements, and we can create a sort of behavior of text in it. All right, let's look at the Flex container. So a Flex container, we have an example here with 3 Flex items, right? And we're saying display Flex. So in this case, we're using that display property. We're setting it to a display of Flex. So a flexible layout must have a parent element with the display property set to Flex. And direct child elements of the flexible container automatically become flexible elements. Okay? So remove this. And then we have flex items. So for flex items, the direct child elements of the flex container automatically becomes flexible with flex items. The element above represents 4 blue flex items inside a gray flex container. So all the children of the flexible container become flexible items.
Oh, good.
So just to reiterate, right, we have our flex item, and we have our main axis, and the main axis is defined by the FlexDirection property. We have a cross axis. The cross axis runs perpendicular to the main axis. We also have what's referred to as a flex direction. This is an axis change. So here we can set the direction of
The screen is frozen.
Oh. Okay. Now you can see it? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
So here we're setting the direction of flexible items inside the div element in reverse order. So we have our display of flex, and then we're doing our row reverse in the flex direction. So we have a couple of different styles here, and we're doing a row reverse for a flex direction. So the flex direction property specifies the direction of flexible items. If the element is not a flexible item, then the flex direction property has no effect, right? And we have FlexWrap. We saw that the default value is no wrap. So when we have no wrap, it specifies that items will not wrap. And when we have wrap, it specifies that the flexible items will wrap if necessary, i.e. the wrapping of those buttons. We have flex properties. So in our flex properties, we have the flex grow property, which specifies how much the item will grow relative to the rest of the flexible items inside of the same container. So let all the flexible items be the same length regardless of its content. Go ahead and try this. So in this flex rule, we have our class main, and then we go main div. Oh. Okay. So in this case, we have our ID selector main, and then we have our element selector. So here we have the flex property being set to 1 for this case where we have our div in the main class. Right? We can change this to 3. We run this, and yeah, we have a green div. It's a green div with more content, right? So yeah, this just has a little bit more content, but we can adjust this again. The flex property. So there's a couple of different properties we can use. We have flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis. So we can use this to set the fixable length on all flexible items. Right? So the flex shrink property specifies how the item will shrink relative to the rest of the flexible items inside of the same container. Look at an example of using flex shrink here. So here we're using that child selector, and we're going to let the second item shrink 3 times more than the rest. Let's go ahead and try this. So we have our ID selector, and then we're going on the div, and then we're going to the child selector, the second child, right? And we're applying flex shrink of 3. So we adjust this. You can try and make this a little more dramatic, and then we'll change to 100. Pretty small. Maybe how about 10? Really small. We'll do 3. Let's do 2. So you see how this kind of will shrink that box to a certain size. We can change this to 2.7. That's why we use the flex shrink property. We also have flex basis. The flex basis property specifies the initial length of a flexible item. So we want to set the initial length of the second flex item to 100 pixels. Go ahead and try this. So the flex basis property, we can set the initial length of the flex items to 50 pixels with an exception. We can set the rule we set the initial length of the second flex item to 100 pixels. Right, so we have that ID selector, then we have the element, and then we have the child, and we're setting the flex basis to 100 pixels. We can change this value to about 200, and then rerun this. And you see how it changes, right? In that case, it's about 200 pixels. Rerun that. There we go. All right. I also have flex shorthand. So the CSS, the flex CSS shorthand property sets how a flex item will grow or shrink to fit the space available in its flex container. So let's go ahead and here's a demo, right? Here we're setting the flex property of 1, flex property of 2, and you can see that they show up over here, right? You can try and change this. So flex size of 1, that's what that value looks like. You can change it to 2, you can change it to 130, 130 pixels. So that flex CSS shorthand property sets how the flex item will grow or shrink to fit the space available in its flex container. Right. We have align items. So these align items align across the cross axis. Right. So we have our cross axis and we have our main axis. And we have our main axis going this way and our cross axis going this way. And the align items will align along the cross axis. Okay. So we'll go ahead and try this here. So in this case, we have the align item center, and this aligns the flex items in the middle of the container. We also have justify content. So this will justify content along the main axis, and we'll use the flex start and flex end. Right? So if we want to justify the content at the start, we can see that we have the content, the start of that div. We can move into center. We can add space in between. We can add space around, and then we can justify space evenly. What does this syntax look like? So in your CSS style sheet, you would specify justify content center. This is the property, and this is the value. And what this will do is it'll pack items around the center. Then if you use justify content start, it'll pack items from the start. Right?
Screen is frozen.
Thank you for letting me know. All right. So just to bring this back up to where we were. What I just showed was how we can align items along the cross axis. Right. So if we go to this example for aligning items along the cross axis here, we can align items, align the flex items in the middle of the container. Right, those are aligned in the middle of the container. And then we have justify content was the next thing that we discussed. So the CSS justify content property defines how the browser distributes space between and around content along items in the main axis. So here the content is.
Person again.
One moment. All right. Everyone can see my screen? Okay. So we have line items, and justify content. Now the next one that we are going to discuss here is align content. So this is when we want to align content with extra space in the cross-access, and we have align items versus align content. So let's go ahead and click in here. So we want to align the content, right? In these examples, we use 600 pixels high in a high container with FlexWrap property set to wrap, and to better demonstrate the align content property, the space between value displays the flex lines with equal space between them. Let's go ahead and try this. So the align content space between displays the flex lines with equal space between them. As we adjust this, you can see how the boxes shift up. We're using a value of wrap, and then we're using the align content for space between, right? The align content space between displays the flex lines with equal space between them. So that's the important thing. The flex lines have equal space between them.
Okay, Evan, the reason why you have so much space at the bottom is because you have a height of 600 pixels.
Yep, that's in the flex container, right? Yep. Okay. All right, so let's take a second here to just gonna go over Flexbox here. So can someone tell me some use cases where we would use Flexbox? Go back to the example that we have here. What sort of applications do we use to leverage Flexbox? Specifically, like with design. Someone think of some useful cases in design where we would want to use a Flexbox.
Table of contents.
A table of contents.
Contents.
Oh, a table of contents. Yep. Right. We could use this for a table of contents, right? We want to be able to see, these contacts showing up in an orderly form. So we could have something like the div here. I'll bring up my screen just a second. All right, let's copy this. All right. And I can add a flex container on this. So what I'd like to do is take what we have here with this flex container and then go ahead and dot flex container, and we have wrap. No wrap in here. And then the screen stop sharing.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, so here are flexible boxes. And we can move this over. and resize the browser, and we can see how this will adjust with that. So yeah, we could use this for a table of contacts, right? And this is a way for us to adjust content in a flexible way. Okay.
This looks like when you're trying to organize your like your home screen for your phone, where you have to like put your apps in different like little boxes that they put.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Any other sort of applications that we can think of for using Flexbox?
I think about the Apple Store because they have different the applications, and I guess if you're on different devices, it looks different. If you're on your laptop, you're minimizing the screen, that will adjust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point.
Sorry, I just spaced out. You could use it for different navigation that you want to always have displayed. If you didn't want, it to shrink, you could have it where it laid underneath like that, or like for controls, like buttons that you want to always be available.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good example, right? We could have buttons, controls to user interface, right? That's a perfect application of this. All right. Yeah. Any other examples that we could think of for using Flexbox?
Menu bar.
Yeah, menu bar, right? Menu bar would be a good example. Yeah. And we covered some of these alignment properties, right? We can align content. We can align content from the cross axis, the main axis. We'd add space around either one, and we have flex start and flex end. So where are some examples where we'd want to align content with Flexbox?
Thumbnails.
Mm-hmm. Yep, a thumbnail. That's a good example. Go ahead and close this. So take a look at the line content property. This is used to align the flex lines. Go ahead and try this. And here we go. All right, so the align space between displays the flex lines with equal space between them. There we go. That's an example.
The screen is frozen again.
All right. So this is a good place to start to apply this. Before we get into animations, we can take what we've done with CSS so far. We've gone over media queries, conditional media queries. Now, we all have a CSS project available. What we can do is try and find some ways to conditionally apply CSS in that case. We'll take some time here to just kind of work on that. And we can reconvene in about 45 minutes. Should be about an hour to add that. So let's specifically pick, at least 2 to 3 of the advanced selectors and apply them to content that we have on the page.